My name is Caitlin Lindsay. I am 35 years old, a former Army captain with a brilliant future at the Pentagon. But now I stand before the court labeled as the gold-digging wife of a tech billionaire. Today, in a courtroom reeking of expensive perfume and hypocrisy, my husband, Corbin, pointed his finger at my face and said into the microphone, "She is just a low-level soldier who knows how to follow orders. She never created a single dime of value for my company." His mother sat behind him, smirking and whispering loud enough for me to hear. "Serves that coarse girl right. Those calloused hands only deserve to carry shoes for Corbin." They think I will collapse. They think that 7 years of me working night shifts as a security guard, cleaning up the vomit of drunks to get money to feed servers for Corbin, has turned me into a submissive slave. But they forgot one thing. I am a logistics officer. And a good officer never goes into battle without a contingency plan. The thing I pull from my breast pocket is not a handkerchief to wipe away tears, but a death sentence for their empire. Let me know where you are watching from, and comment the word karma right below if you believe that you reap what you sow, and traitors will sooner or later pay a heavy price. The air conditioning in the Fairfax County Circuit Court was set to a temperature I could only describe as morgue chic. It was freezing, a sterile chill that seeped right through the thin fabric of my polyester blazer. I bought this suit at Target 3 days ago for $40 because it was all I could afford. It was navy blue, slightly ill-fitting around the shoulders, and it scratched against my skin every time I shifted in my seat. Across the aisle, separated by a few feet of mahogany and a million miles of social status, sat my husband, Corbin Reynolds. He was wearing a custom-tailored Armani suit, charcoal gray, silk lining, that cost more than my father made in 3 months of active duty. I knew exactly how much it cost because I was the one who signed the check for it 2 years ago, back when he said he needed to look the part to woo investors. He looked the part now, all right. He looked like the freshly minted king of tech, the CEO of Restock Solutions, the darling of Washington, D.C.'s new money elite. And I was just the embarrassing footnote he was trying to erase. Corbin's lawyer, a man whose smile had too many teeth and not enough warmth, had just finished painting a portrait of me that was unrecognizable. According to him, I was lazy. I was unsupportive. I was a leash attached to the side of a great man's vision. "Mr. Reynolds," the lawyer asked, his voice smooth like oiled leather, "can you describe for the court Mrs. Lindsay's contribution to the founding of Restock Solutions?" Corbin stood up. He adjusted his lapels, a gesture he practiced in the mirror. He turned his charm on the judge, the same way he used to turn it on me. "Your Honor," Corbin began, his voice projecting that perfect TED Talk cadence. "Restock is my brainchild. It is the result of sleepless nights, of coding until my fingers bled, of a singular vision to revolutionize supply chain logistics." He paused for dramatic effect, glancing briefly at me with eyes that were completely dead. "Caitlin, she was there, I suppose. But she didn't write the code. She didn't close the deals. She didn't understand the complexity of the algorithms." He took a breath, and then he delivered the line that made the air leave my lungs. "To be honest, Your Honor, she was just background noise, static. While I was building the future, she was just existing in the other room." Background noise. The words hung in the sterile air. 7 years. 7 years of my life reduced to the hum of a refrigerator or the sound of traffic outside a window. I didn't move. I didn't gasp. My training at West Point didn't allow for public displays of hysteria. I sat perfectly still, my spine not touching the back of the hard wooden chair. But under the table, my hands were clenched so tight my knuckles were white. These hands. I looked down at them briefly. They weren't soft like the hands of the women Corbin associated with now. My knuckles were scarred from obstacle courses and hand-to-hand combat drills. The skin on my palms was rough, thickened by years of gripping M4 carbines and later by gripping heavy flashlights and steering wheels during double shifts as a security guard. Behind Corbin, in the gallery reserved for family, sat his mother, Mrs. Mia Reynolds. She was the epitome of Virginia old money. Pearls that cost a tuition fee, hair sprayed into an immovable helmet of blonde, and a gaze that could freeze water. She leaned over to the woman sitting next to her, Rebecca Corbin's executive assistant, a 24-year-old Vassar graduate wearing a Chanel dress that hugged her like a second skin. Rebecca was everything I wasn't: soft, civilian, expensive. Mia didn't whisper quietly. She wanted me to hear. She needed me to hear. "Thank God my son finally woke up," Mia hissed, her lips barely moving. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and revulsion, like she was looking at a stain on a Persian rug. Look at her, sitting there stiff as a board. She's so coarse. Those calloused hands of hers are only fit for carrying Corbin's shoes, not wearing his ring. Rebecca giggled, a light tinkling sound that cut through the tension. "Don't worry, Mrs. Reynolds," Rebecca whispered back. "We'll have this wrapped up by lunch." They thought it was over. They looked at my target suit, my lack of makeup, my stoic silence, and they saw defeat. They saw a woman who had been discarded like an old pair of combat boots that had lost their tread. They saw a grunt, a soldier good for taking orders but not for thinking. But they made a critical error in their tactical assessment. They mistook discipline for weakness. Inside my head, the chaos of the courtroom faded. The insults, background noise, coarse, servant, didn't hurt anymore. They just clarified the mission parameters. I took a slow, deep breath, counting to 4 on the inhale, holding for 4, exhaling for 4. Tactical breathing. I remembered the oath I took. I will support and defend. But I also remembered a verse my father, a sergeant major who had seen hell and back, used to quote before every deployment. Psalm 144:1. "Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war, my fingers for battle." God had trained these hands for war. Corbin had just forgotten that war isn't always fought with guns. Sometimes it's fought with paper. The judge, a weary-looking man named Callahan, looked over his spectacles at me. "Mrs. Lindsay, your attorney has remained silent. Do you have anything to say before we proceed to the division of assets? Or do you accept the plaintiff's characterization?" My attorney, a court-appointed placeholder who had barely looked at my file, started to stand up to ask for a recess. I put a hand on his arm to stop him. "I've got this," I said quietly. I stood up. The target suit pulled tight across my shoulders. I didn't smooth it out. I stood at the position of attention, my chin up, my eyes locking directly onto Corbin's. For a second, his confident smirk faltered. He saw something in my eyes he hadn't seen in a long time. He saw the captain. "Your Honor," my voice was steady, projecting to the back of the room without shouting. "I do not accept the plaintiff's characterization. Mr. Reynolds claims I was merely background noise. He claims I contributed nothing to the logic or the structure of Restock Solutions." "We have established that, Mrs. Lindsay." The judge sighed, checking his watch. "Unless you have new evidence, this is hearsay." "I do have evidence, Your Honor," I said. Corbin rolled his eyes. Mia let out an audible scoff. They expected a love letter, or maybe a receipt for groceries. I reached up with my right hand, slowly, deliberately. I moved my hand toward the inside breast pocket of my cheap blazer. It was the same motion I would use to reach for a sidearm, but today the weapon was made of cellulose and ink. I could feel the texture of the folded document against my fingertips. It was warm from my body heat. It was the only thing of value I had left in this world, aside from my integrity. "I would like to submit Exhibit A," I said, my fingers closing around the paper. "A document signed by Mr. Reynolds and notarized in Paris, France, 5 years ago. A document detailing exactly who designed the logistics algorithm that built his company and exactly what that contribution is worth." Corbin's face went from smug to confused, and then, as he realized what year I was talking about, the color drained from his face faster than blood from an open artery. I pulled the document out. It was time to fire for effect. The paper in my hand felt heavy, heavier than the M4 carbine I used to carry on patrol. As my fingers traced the embossed seal of the notary, the freezing air of the courtroom seemed to warp and shift. The scent of expensive cologne and floor polish faded, replaced by the smell of stale beer, cheap heating oil, and desperation. Suddenly, I wasn't standing in front of Judge Callahan anymore. I was back in Virginia, 7 years ago. It was the winter that changed everything. The winter I stopped being Captain Caitlin Lindsay, a woman who commanded respect, and started becoming Caitlin Reynolds, the woman who commanded nothing but her own silent sacrifices. We met at a charity mixer at Fort Belvoir. It was one of those mandatory fun events where officers were expected to mingle with the local civilian contractors. Corbin was standing by the punch bowl, looking out of place in a suit that was clearly off the rack and a size too big. He had this boyish charm, a way of looking at you like you were the only person in the room who understood the secret joke of the universe. He told me he was a visionary. He used words like disruptor and paradigm shift. I was a logistics officer. I dealt in fuel, ammunition, and transport schedules. His world of abstract potential was intoxicating to someone whose life was measured in grid coordinates and casualty reports. But charm doesn't pay the rent. I remember the night the vision almost died. We were living in a studio apartment in Alexandria that was barely larger than a prison cell. The heating was broken, and we were wrapped in layers of blankets, our breath visible in the air. Corbin was hunched over his ancient laptop, a machine that sounded like a jet engine preparing for takeoff. Suddenly, the screen went black. The fan whirred and died. Silence filled the room, heavy and terrifying. "No," Corbin whispered. He tapped the keys frantically. "No, no, no." He turned to me, tears streaming down his face. Not stoic, soldier tears. These were the tears of a child whose toy had broken. "It's gone, Caitlin. The code, the prototype, the server crashed. It's all gone." He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was a heap on the floor. "I can't do this," he sobbed. "I'm a failure. My mom was right. I'm never going to amount to anything." Seeing him like that, it broke something in me. It triggered that protective instinct, the same one that made me check my soldier's gear 3 times before a mission. I couldn't fix the code, but I could fix the problem. I walked over to my rucksack in the corner. Inside, tucked into a battered envelope, was a check from the Department of Defense. It was my combat pay, hazard pay, a bonus I had earned from a 9-month deployment where I had dodged IEDs and slept in the dirt. That money was supposed to be a down payment on a house for my parents in North Carolina. They were getting older, and their roof was leaking. I'd promised them I would help. I looked at the check. Then I looked at Corbin, curled up on the floor, defeated. "Get up," I said softly. "What?" He looked up, eyes red and puffy. "Get up. We're going to Best Buy." I remember the fluorescent lights of the Best Buy in Springfield. They were blindingly bright. Corbin was like a kid in a candy store, his grief forgotten the moment we walked into the computer section. He ran his hands over the sleek aluminum chassis of the high-end servers and the powerful workstations. "This one," he said, pointing to a setup that cost more than my first car. "With this, I could rebuild Restock in half the time. The processing power. Caitlin, it's beautiful." He didn't look at the price tag. He never did. That was my job. I walked to the register. My hand shook as I handed over the check and my debit card to cover the difference. The cashier, a teenager with acne and a bored expression, didn't know that the money I was spending was blood money. He didn't know I had almost lost my leg for those dollars. "Receipt in the bag?" he mumbled. "Yes," I said. "Please?" We drove home in silence, the expensive boxes filling the back seat of my beat-up Ford Taurus. Corbin was humming. He was happy. That happiness lasted until Thanksgiving, 2 weeks later. Thanksgiving is supposed to be about abundance. It's turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, and family arguments over football. But that year, our bank account balance was 12 Ward Yates. We couldn't afford a turkey. We couldn't even afford the gas to drive down to North Carolina to see my parents. So, we stayed in the freezing studio apartment. Dinner was a frozen DiGiorno pizza. I cooked it in the toaster oven because the main oven was unreliable. We sat on the floor, wrapped in a duvet, sharing the pizza off a paper plate. Corbin took a bite of the cardboard crust pizza and looked at me with those intense blue eyes. The blue light from his new monitors reflected in them, making him look almost angelic. "Caitlin," he said, reaching out to touch my face. His hand was warm, soft. My cheek was rough from the dry winter air. "I know this is hard. I know I haven't been the provider you deserve." "It's okay," I lied. It wasn't okay. I was hungry, I was cold, and I missed my mom. "No, listen to me," he insisted. He pulled me closer, burying his face in my neck. "I'm going to make this right. Restock is going to be huge. I can feel it. And when it happens, when we make it..." He pulled back to look me in the eye. "You will never have to worry about money again. You will never have to work another day in your life if you don't want to. I will buy you a house. I will buy your parents a house. I will give you the world, Caitlin. Because you believed in me when no one else did." He kissed me then, tasting of tomato sauce and promises. And I believed him. God help me, I believed him. I thought I was investing in a partnership. I thought we were a team, a fire team of two against the world. I didn't know then that I wasn't a partner. I was just venture capital with a heartbeat. The memory faded, dissolving back into the harsh reality of the courtroom. I looked across the aisle at Corbin. He was whispering something to his lawyer, looking annoyed, probably checking the time on his Rolex. A Rolex that cost 10 times what that computer had cost. He had kept his promise in a twisted way. He had made it huge. He had made millions. But the "we" in his promise had silently turned into... And the woman who had sacrificed her combat pay, her parents' roof, and her own dignity to buy him the tools of his success? She was just background noise. I looked down at the document in my hand again. The anger that had been a cold knot in my stomach began to burn hot. "You promised me the world, Corbin," I thought, my grip tightening on the paper. "But you forgot that I'm the one who drew the map." The lawyer for the opposition cleared his throat, bringing me fully back to the present. "Mrs. Lindsay," he sneered. "We are waiting." I looked up, my eyes dry, my heart hardened into something resembling the steel of a weapon. "I'm ready," I said. But before I could hand the document to the bailiff, another memory hit me, a darker one. The memory of the choice that truly sealed my fate. The day I didn't just give him my money, but gave him my career. It started with a letter from the Pentagon that should have been the happiest day of my life. The envelope was thick. In the military, a thick envelope usually means good news. It means orders. It means movement. I remember sitting at our rickety kitchen table, my hands trembling as I tore open the seal. Inside was official Department of the Army stationery, the kind with the watermark that you can feel under your thumb. Department of the Army subject. Permanent change of station. PCS. Orders to CPT Caitlin Lindsay. Assignment, 21st Theater Sustainment Command, Ramstein Air Base, Germany. Ramstein. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Ramstein wasn't just a base. For a logistics officer, it was the show. It was the hub of American military power in Europe. And attached to these orders was the promotion list. My name was on it, Major. I made the list, I whispered to the empty room. I'm going to be a major. It was everything I had worked for since I was 18 years old. It was West Point. It was the sleepless nights in Ranger School. It was the culmination of a decade of service. When Corbin walked in that evening, carrying a bag of takeout Chinese food because he was too stressed to cook, I was beaming. I had the letter propped up against the salt shaker like a trophy. "Babe, look," I said, unable to keep the vibration out of my voice. "Look at this." Corbin put the food down. He picked up the letter. He read it silently. I watched his face, waiting for the smile, waiting for the "I'm so proud of you," waiting for the celebration. Instead, his face fell. His shoulders slumped. He looked like I had just handed him a foreclosure notice. "Germany," he said. His voice was flat. "That's far." "It's Ramstein, Corbin. It's a huge promotion. It comes with a significant pay raise. We could finally get out of this apartment. You could come with me. You can code from anywhere, right?" He dropped the letter onto the table like it was contaminated. He walked over to the window and stared out at the parking lot. I can't go to Germany, Caitlin, he said, his back to me. My investors are here. DC is the hub. If I leave now, Restock dies. It just dies. But he turned around. His eyes were wide, panicked. This was his weapon of choice, weaponized fragility. If you go, he said, his voice cracking, I can't stop you. You're free to do what you want. But I can't do this without you. I'm drowning, Caitlin. Every day I feel like I'm drowning. You're the only thing keeping my head above water. If you leave, I don't know what will happen to me. I don't know if I can make it. He didn't say, don't go. He didn't forbid me. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he made my success the cause of his potential failure. He made my dream the murderer of his dream. I looked at the orders. Then I looked at my husband, who was looking at me like a puppy about to be kicked. The next weekend, I drove down to North Carolina to see my father. I needed a reality check. I needed the sergeant major. My dad was sitting on his porch, polishing his boots out of habit, even though he had been retired for 10 years. He read the orders. He smiled, a slow, proud smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Major Lindsay, he said, testing the sound of it. Sounds damn good, kid. Damn good. Then I told him about Corbin. I told him about Restock. I told him I was thinking about turning it down. The smile vanished. He put the boot down. He looked at me with a gaze that was harder than granite. You're thinking about turning down a field-grade promotion, he said slowly, to stay home and wash socks for a boy who plays with computers? He's my husband, Dad. He needs me. We're a team. A team pulls together, Caitlin. A team doesn't ask the lead climber to cut their rope so the guy at the bottom feels safer. He leaned forward, his voice low and intense. That boy isn't building a company. He's selling smoke. And you? You are a soldier. You are a leader. If you give this up, if you desert your post for him, you aren't just losing a rank. You're losing yourself. I'm not deserting, I argued, feeling the sting of tears. I'm supporting my family. You're throwing your honor into a wood chipper, he said, standing up and walking into the house. He didn't look back. The drive back to Virginia was the longest of my life. I cried for the first 100 miles. Then I stopped crying and started bargaining. It's just a job, I told myself. Corbin is right. Marriage comes first. When he succeeds, it will all be worth it. I walked into the personnel office at the Pentagon the next Monday. The clerk, a sergeant first class who knew me, looked at the form I placed on the counter. Request for separation, transfer to individual ready reserve. Ma'am, he asked, confused. You're on the promotion list. Are you sure about this? My hand hovered over the pen. I could see Ramstein in my mind. I could see the C-17s taking off, the mission briefings, the purpose, the pride. Then I saw Corbin's face. I'm drowning, Caitlin. I took a breath that felt like inhaling broken glass. I'm sure, Sergeant, I said. Family reasons. I signed my name. The ink was black and permanent. With that signature, Captain Caitlin Lindsay didn't exactly die, but she went into a coma. In her place, Mrs. Corbin Reynolds was born, a woman whose only rank was supportive wife, and whose only mission was to keep a man-child happy. I walked out of the Pentagon feeling lighter, but it wasn't the lightness of freedom. It was the lightness of something hollowed out. I went home and told Corbin. He didn't cry. He didn't fall to his knees in gratitude. He just hugged me briefly and said, Great. Now, can you help me organize these spreadsheets? I have a pitch meeting tomorrow. Just like that, my sacrifice was consumed, digested, and forgotten in the span of 30 seconds. As I sat there that night, categorizing his expenses while he played video games to blow off steam, I looked at my hands. They were the same hands that had held a rifle. Now they were just typing data for a man who didn't even know how to load a dishwasher. I should have listened to the sergeant major. I should have listened to the gut instinct that screamed, run. But I didn't. I stayed. And because I stayed, I eventually found myself standing in a warehouse at 2 a.m., freezing my ass off, guarding someone else's property while my husband slept in a warm bed. If you have ever given up a piece of yourself for someone who didn't appreciate it, or if you believe that a woman should never have to dim her light for a man to shine, please hit that like button right now. And in the comments, simply type, "I am worthy," to remind yourself and everyone else here that your dreams matter. The sound of the pen scratching across my resignation paper echoed in my memory. Scratch, scratch, done. But that sound soon morphed into something else, something louder, something harsher. It turned into the grinding, metallic screech of a rolling steel door slamming shut. Clang. Welcome to the night shift. The wind cut through my cheap polyester security jacket like a razor blade. It was 2 a.m. in Northern Virginia, and the temperature had dropped to single digits. I was patrolling the outer perimeter of a massive logistics warehouse, the kind of place where dreams go to be packaged in cardboard boxes and shipped via Prime. My flashlight beam danced over the frozen asphalt. My boots. Walmart specials, not the high-quality Danner combat boots I used to wear, crunched loudly on the black ice. Every step sent a jolt of pain up my shins. I had been on my feet for 9 hours straight. I wasn't Captain Lindsay here. I was just hey you or guard. My job was to make sure nobody stole copper wire or broke into the trailers. It was a job that required zero brain power and infinite patience. It was a humiliation that burned deeper than the cold. As I rounded the corner near the loading docks, a familiar sound made me freeze. It was the low rumble of a Humvee engine. A National Guard convoy was stopping for fuel at the truck stop adjacent to the warehouse. I saw the uniforms, the camouflage, the confident way they moved. And then I saw him. Getting out of the lead vehicle was a man I knew, Sergeant Martinez. He had been one of my best squad leaders when I was a lieutenant. Now, I saw the rank on his chest, warrant officer. He had made it. He looked sharp, professional, respected. He started walking toward the vending machines near where I was standing. Panic, hot and sudden, flooded my chest. I couldn't let him see me. I couldn't let him see his former commander, the woman he used to salute, standing here in an ill-fitting security uniform, holding a flashlight like a glorified mall cop. The shame was physical, a nausea that roiled in my gut. I ducked behind a dumpster. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. I pressed my back against the cold metal, smelling the rotting garbage inside, and closed my eyes. "You good, sir?" I heard Martinez ask someone. "Yeah, just grabbing coffee," another voice replied. I waited until the engines roared back to life and the convoy rolled away. Only then did I slide down to the ground, my breath hitching in my chest. I pulled my ham sandwich out of my pocket. It was squished and half frozen. I took a bite, tasting the stale bread and the bitterness of my own choices. I finished my shift at 6 a.m. I drove home in a daze, my eyes burning from exhaustion. When I unlocked the door to our apartment, I tried to be quiet. I really did. But my frozen fingers fumbled with the keys, and they jingled loudly. "Ugh, seriously?" Corbin's voice came from the bedroom. It was muffled by his pillow, thick with sleep and irritation. I walked into the bedroom. He was buried under the warm duvet, only a tuft of hair visible. The room smelled like sleep and comfort. "I'm sorry," I whispered, stripping off my uniform. My back ached. My feet were throbbing. "You're always so loud when you come in," he groaned, rolling over. I was in the middle of a really good dream about the IPO launch. Now I'm awake. He didn't ask how my night was. He didn't ask if I was cold. He didn't ask if I was hungry. He just pulled the blanket tighter and went back to sleep. He wouldn't wake up until 10 a.m. By then, I would have cleaned the kitchen, prepped his lunch, and passed out on the couch for 4 hours before doing it all over again. I went into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. There were dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. My skin looked gray. I looked 10 years older than 32. Later that afternoon, I was in the kitchen, ironing my uniform for the next shift. The steam hissed, filling the small room. There was a knock at the door. It was Mia. She breezed in without waiting for an invitation, carrying a distinct air of judgment along with her Hermes handbag. She looked around the apartment, wrinkling her nose at the faint smell of ironing starch. "Oh, Caitlin," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Still working that job?" "It pays the bills, Mia," I said, not looking up from the ironing board. "Corbin needs every cent for the servers right now." She walked over and picked up my security jacket. She held it by the tips of her manicured fingers like it was a dead rat. "It's just so masculine," she said. "Look at the cut of this. It's boxy. It's shapeless. You look like a man in this thing, Caitlin. No wonder Corbin doesn't want to take you to the investor dinners. You're hardly the trophy wife type, are you?" She laughed, a light, cruel sound. "I mean, look at your hands. They're so rough. You should really invest in some lotion, dear. Or maybe gloves. To hide them." I set the iron down. I set it down hard. "My hands are paying for your son's dream, Mia," I said, my voice low. "Don't get testy," she sniffed. "I'm just saying. Appearance matters. Especially in our world. Our world. As if I wasn't the one financing it. After she left, leaving a lingering scent of Chanel No. 5 and insecurity, I went to my locker. It wasn't really a locker. It was just a plastic bin where I kept my gear. Taped to the inside of the lid was a piece of paper. It was yellowed and curling at the edges. I'd printed it out the day I resigned my commission. It was a quote from Theodore Roosevelt, "The man in the arena." I read it aloud, my voice trembling slightly in the empty apartment. "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood." I touched my face. No blood today, just dust and sweat. Who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Mia was the critic, Corbin was the spectator. But I was in the arena. I was the one taking the hits. I was the one bleeding so they could shine. I wiped a single angry tear from my cheek. I wouldn't cry. Crying was a luxury for people who slept 8 hours a night. "I am in the arena," I whispered to the empty room. "And I will not leave until the battle is won." I finished ironing my uniform. I put it on, buttoning it up like armor. I laced up my cheap boots. I was fighting for my family. I was fighting for Corbin's future. I told myself that one day he would understand. One day he would look at my rough hands and see love, not ugliness. But a small, cold voice in the back of my mind whispered a different truth. What if he never looks? What if he only sees the checkbook? That thought terrified me more than the freezing cold. So I pushed it down, locked it away in a mental box, and grabbed my keys. I had to get to work. But before the grind completely destroyed me, there was one moment of respite. One trip that was supposed to be a celebration, but ended up being the moment I finally woke up. Paris. The city of lights. The city of love. Or so they said. For me, it would become the city of the contingency plan. The place where the soldier in me finally took over from the wife. The engine of my Ford Taurus sputtered to life, sounding tired. Just like me. I backed out of the driveway, heading into the darkness, not knowing that the light at the end of the tunnel was actually an oncoming train called betrayal. But in Paris? In Paris, I would build a barricade. Paris is supposed to be the city where love is reaffirmed. For Corbin and me, it was the city where love was finally exposed for what it was, a transaction. The trip was Corbin's idea. He called it our belated honeymoon, 5 years too late. But the timing was suspicious. Restock Solutions had just started gaining serious traction in the European market, and he needed to secure a massive round of funding from a consortium of French investors. He needed a wife on his arm to look stable, dependable, and family-oriented. We stayed at the Hôtel Plaza Athénée, a place so opulent it made my teeth ache. Crystal chandeliers, red geraniums spilling from every balcony, and staff who spoke English better than most Americans. But for the first 3 days, I saw more of the hotel concierge than I did of my husband. I have to network, Caitlin, Corbin said, adjusting his silk tie in the mirror. These French investors are old school. They want FaceTime. Why don't you go shopping? Buy something nice. Here. He tossed his black American Express card onto the bed. It landed with a soft thwack. Go to Chanel, get a bag, or maybe some new shoes. Those boots you wear are embarrassing. He left before I could answer. I didn't go to Chanel. I didn't go to the Louvre. Instead, I sat in a small cafe in the 8th arrondissement, nursing a black coffee and watching the Parisians rush by. My gut was churning. It wasn't the croissants. It was instinct. I had noticed things. Small things. Corbin changing the passcode on his phone. Him taking calls on the balcony at 2 a.m., whispering. The way he looked at me, not with affection, but with the critical eye of a manager assessing a depreciating asset. I was a soldier. I knew when the enemy was maneuvering. I knew when I was being flanked. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Monsieur Beaumont, I said when the line connected. Jean-Luc Beaumont was an old friend of my father's, a former JAG officer who had transitioned into international corporate law in Paris. He met me an hour later, looking impeccable in a tweed suit. Caitlin, he said, kissing me on both cheeks. You look troubled. I need your help, Jean-Luc, I said, cutting straight to the chase. I need legal protection, and I need it now. We spent the next 4 hours in his office drafting a document. It wasn't a standard post-nuptial agreement. It was a recognition of sweat equity. It detailed every hour I'd worked, every algorithm I'd optimized using military logistics protocols, every dollar of my own money I had invested. This clause here, Jean-Luc said, pointing with a gold pen. It states that in the event of a dissolution of marriage, 49% of all current and future assets of Restock Solutions are rightfully yours as a founding partner, regardless of title. Will it hold up in a U.S. court? I asked. It is drafted under international commercial law, enforceable in both jurisdictions due to Restock's dual incorporation. He smiled thinly. It is ironclad. But only if he signs it willingly. He'll sign, I said. I know his weakness. Corbin's weakness was arrogance and alcohol. The trap was set for our last night. Corbin came stumbling into our suite at 3 a.m., smelling of expensive cognac and cigar smoke. He was euphoric. I did it, babe, he shouted, throwing his jacket on the floor. 5 million euros. We're going global. He grabbed me and spun me around, but his eyes were glazed. He wasn't seeing me. He was seeing dollar signs. That's amazing, Corbin, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm so proud of you. We need to celebrate. But first, we need to pack. We leave in 4 hours. Ugh, paperwork, he groaned, flopping onto the bed. I hate logistics. I know, I said soothingly. That's why I handled it all. I just need your signature on a few things for customs and the new visa requirements for your investor meetings in London. I brought over a clipboard. On it was a stack of papers. The top one was a customs declaration. The second was an insurance waiver. Buried in the middle, page 3 of 5, was the sweat equity agreement. Just sign here and here and here, I said, pointing to the lines. I handed him a pen. Corbin laughed, a loose, sloppy sound. You're such a control freak, Caitlin, always with the lists and the forms. What would I do without you? You'd be lost, I said honestly. He scribbled his signature on the first page, then the second. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he would hear it. This was the kill zone. If he stopped to read, if he sobered up for just 1 second, he flipped to the third page. The title, Equity Distribution Agreement, was right there at the top in bold letters. But Corbin didn't look at the top. He looked at the line where I was pointing at the bottom. You worry too much, wifey, he slurred. We're rich now. We can hire people to do this stuff. He signed it. A loopy, jagged scrawl. Corbin J. Reynolds. He flipped the page and signed the next one. Then he dropped the pen and fell back onto the pillows, passing out within seconds. I stood there for a moment, listening to his heavy breathing. I carefully unclamped the papers. I took the agreement, folded it neatly, and placed it inside the hidden pocket of my travel blazer, the pocket right over my heart. "Sleep tight, CEO," I whispered. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the Eiffel Tower sparkle in the distance. I felt a strange mixture of relief and immense sadness. I had just insured my future, but I had also just signed the death certificate of my marriage. A marriage that, in reality, had died the moment I became background noise. That signature in Paris was my shield. But I wouldn't need to use it for another 2 years. 2 years of watching him grow more distant, more cruel, more like his mother. I snapped back to the present, to the cold Virginia courtroom. The memory of that pen scratching on paper in Paris was so vivid I could almost hear it. But it was replaced by a different sound. The sound of a car door slamming. The sound of a different signature, on a different document, being thrown at me like garbage, the day he finally discarded me. I looked at Corbin across the aisle. He was whispering to his lawyer again, looking confident. He had forgotten Paris. He had forgotten the girl who bought his computers. He had forgotten everything except his own reflection. He was about to remember. But first the judge had to see the evidence of the final betrayal. The moment when the man in the arena was finally stabbed in the back by the person she was fighting for. It happened on a Tuesday. A Tuesday that started like any other, but ended with my world shattering. The invitation said, "Black tie optional." But for the crowd at the Ritz-Carlton in Georgetown, that meant, "Wear your net worth." This was the launch party for Restock Solutions Series C funding round. It was the night Corbin had been dreaming of since he cried over his broken laptop in our frozen apartment. I was standing near a potted fern, trying to make myself invisible. I was wearing a simple black dress I'd picked up at Ross Dress for Less on the clearance rack for $29. It was clean, it was modest, and compared to the glittering gowns around me, it looked like a potato sack. Corbin, of course, was in his element. He was holding court in the center of the room, laughing loudly at a joke made by a silver-haired venture capitalist. And clinging to his arm, like a very expensive barnacle, was Rebecca. Rebecca was 24. She was a Vassar graduate with a degree in art history and a daddy who sat on the board of 3 Fortune 500 companies. Tonight, she was wearing a vintage Chanel gown that probably cost more than my entire year's salary as a security guard. It was cream-colored, backless, and showed off skin that had clearly never known a day of hard labor. She laughed at everything Corbin said, throwing her head back to expose her long, elegant neck. She touched his arm constantly, a light, proprietary touch that made my stomach turn. I took a sip of my sparkling water. I was the wife. I was the co-founder, technically. But nobody here knew that. To them, I was just there. "Excuse me, miss?" I turned around. An older man with a bulbous nose and a tuxedo that strained at the buttons was holding out an empty glass towards me. "Could you be a dear and fetch me another Chardonnay? And make sure it's chilled this time. The last one was tepid." I froze. He thought I was the help. I looked down at my dress. I looked at my hands, which were devoid of jewelry except for my simple gold wedding band. I started to say, "I'm not." "Oh, Arthur, don't be silly," Corbin's voice cut in. He had walked over, with Rebecca still attached to his side. I felt a surge of relief. He was going to correct him. He was going to introduce me. "This is my wife, Caitlin. She helped build this company." Corbin smiled that charming, devastating smile. "She's not on the payroll, Arthur, but she loves to help out, don't you, babe?" He looked at me. His eyes were hard, daring me to make a scene. "She's very serviceable," Corbin added, winking at the investor. I felt like I had been slapped. The air left my lungs. Serviceable, like a truck, like a pair of boots. Arthur laughed. "Well, isn't that nice? A helpful woman is a rare find these days." He thrust the glass closer to my chest. I took the glass. My hand was shaking so badly the crystal stem rattled against my wedding ring. "I'll get that for you," I whispered. As I turned toward the bar, humiliation burning my cheeks like acid, I ran straight into Mia. My mother-in-law was holding court at a high-top table, surrounded by her bridge club friends. She saw the glass in my hand. She saw my face, and she smiled. It was the smile of a predator that had just cornered a wounded rabbit. "Caitlin!" she called out, her voice shrill enough to cut through the ambient jazz music. Perfect timing. She handed me her own empty glass. Then she picked up another one from the table, and another. "Since you're heading to the bar, be a lamb and refresh these for us," she said loudly. "And get some more ice. The service here is dreadfully slow." "Mia, Oh, don't look so put out," she snapped, her voice dropping to a hiss that only I and the people immediately around us could hear. "It's not like you're doing anything else useful tonight. You're just standing there looking like a funeral attendee." She leaned in closer, her eyes glittering with malice. "Besides, Caitlin, you're used to manual labor, aren't you? With those hands? You're probably quicker than the actual servers. You know how to hustle. Isn't that what you people do?" "Hustle? You people. The working class, the soldiers, the ones who cleaned up their messes." I stood there, holding 3 empty glasses, feeling the weight of 100 staring eyes. I wanted to smash the glasses on the floor. I wanted to scream that I was a captain in the United States Army, that I had led convoys through combat zones, that I was the reason they were all standing here tonight. But I didn't. Because I was disciplined, and because, deep down, a part of me, the part that had been beaten down by years of their snobbery, believed her. "Here, let me help you with that." It was Rebecca. She'd glided over, smelling of roses and money. She didn't take the glasses from me. She just placed a hand on my shoulder. It felt patronizing, like petting a dog. "You look tired, Caitlin," Rebecca cooed. Her voice was sweet, sickly sweet. "Why don't you just go home? Corbin is going to be late. We have to discuss the IPO strategy with the partners, and honestly, it's all very technical. It would just give you a headache." She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my Ross dress. "You wouldn't understand the nuances of what we're doing," she said softly. "Go home. Get some rest. You have that security job tomorrow, right?" She said security job the way one might say sewage treatment. That was the moment. That was the kill shot. It wasn't just the insult to my intelligence, it was the displacement. She wasn't just telling me to leave the party, she was telling me to leave my life. She was stepping into my role, taking my husband, taking my company, and relegating me to the shadows where the help belonged. I looked at Corbin. He was watching us. He saw his mother treating me like a servant. He saw his mistress dismissing me like a child. And he turned his back. He turned back to Arthur and laughed at another joke. I set the glasses down on the nearest table. Clink, clink, clink. "You're right, Rebecca," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I wouldn't understand. Enjoy the party." I walked out. I walked past the champagne tower, past the ice sculptures, past the life I had paid for with my blood and sweat. I walked out into the cool DC night, my heels clicking on the pavement. I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. The rage inside me was no longer a fire. It was a cold, hard block of ice. They thought I was leaving because I was defeated. They thought I was running away to hide in my shame. They were wrong. I wasn't retreating. I was breaking contact to realign my forces. If you have ever been made to feel small by people who should have lifted you up, or if you simply despise the arrogance of those who think money buys them the right to treat others like dirt, hit that like button right now. And in the comments, I want you to type just one word: respect. Let them know that we see them and we demand better. As I sat in my beat-up car in the valet line, watching the valet look at my vehicle with disdain, I realized something. The death warrant in my pocket, the agreement from Paris, wasn't enough. Not anymore. I needed more than just money. I needed total, scorched earth victory. And 3 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon, Corbin would give me the final piece of ammunition I needed. He didn't send a text. He didn't call. He sent a Porsche. And a process server. Tuesday afternoon. 2 p.m. The sun was beating down on the asphalt of the distribution center, creating shimmering waves of heat that made the horizon look like a mirage. I was in the guard shack, sweating through my polyester uniform. The air conditioner had broken 3 days ago, and management hadn't bothered to fix it. I was checking a manifest for a delivery of electronics, my mind drifting to the grocery list I needed to buy after my shift. Milk, eggs, maybe a steak for Corbin since he had closed that big deal. A low, guttural growl cut through the hum of the passing trucks. It wasn't a diesel engine. It was the distinct, aggressive purr of a high-performance sports car. I looked up. A Porsche 911 Turbo S, black as oil and sleek as a bullet, was pulling up to the gate. It didn't have a visitor pass. It didn't have a delivery manifest. I stepped out of the shack, my hand instinctively going to my belt, though I carried no weapon, only a radio and a flashlight. "Sir, you can't park here," I started to say, raising my hand. The car stopped. The window rolled down with a smooth, electronic whir. Corbin was in the driver's seat. He was wearing sunglasses that cost more than my monthly rent. His hands were gripping the leather steering wheel, his knuckles white. He didn't look at me. He looked straight ahead, at the endless rows of shipping containers. "Corbin?" I asked, confused. "What are you doing here? Did something happen?" He didn't answer. Instead, a nondescript gray sedan pulled up behind the Porsche. A man in a cheap suit got out. He walked briskly towards me, a manila envelope in his hand. "Caitlin Lindsay?" the man asked. "Yes?" He thrust the envelope into my chest. "You've been served." He turned around, walked back to his sedan, and drove away. Just like that. I looked down at the envelope. Fairfax County Circuit Court. Petition for dissolution of marriage. My stomach dropped. I looked back at Corbin. He finally turned his head. He didn't take off his sunglasses. "Corbin," I whispered. "What is this?" "It's over, Caitlin," he said. His voice was devoid of emotion. It was business. "My lawyer will handle the details. I'm offering a settlement. It's generous. Take it and sign." "Generous?" I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You're serving me divorce papers at my job?" "At the job I took to support you." "I need to move on," he said, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. "Restock is going public next year. The board, the investors, they expect a certain image. I need a wife who can elevate my brand, someone who fits in at the galas, someone soft." He paused, and then he delivered the line that his mother must have scripted for him. "Mom was right. You're too rigid. Too G.I. Jane. You don't have the softness of a woman, Caitlin. You treat everything like a mission. It's exhausting. Rebecca? She understands the lifestyle. She fits. She fits." He was trading me in. Like a used car, I had too many miles on the odometer. I had too many scratches on the paint. "I built your lifestyle, Corbin," I said, my voice trembling with a rage so pure it felt like ice in my veins. "I bought the servers. I wrote the logic for your logistics chain. I fed you when you were broke." "And I appreciate that," he said dismissively. "That's why the settlement is generous. Keep the ring. Pawn it if you want. Consider it severance pay." Severance pay. He put the car in gear. The engine roared, a beast, ready to pounce. "Goodbye, Caitlin," he said. He didn't wait for a response. He floored the accelerator. The Porsche shot forward, kicking up dust and gravel that stung my face. I watched the taillights disappear around the bend, leaving me standing alone in the heat, holding the paperwork that erased 7 years of my life. I didn't cry. Tears are for pain. This wasn't pain. This was clarity. I finished my shift. I checked every truck. I signed every log. I did my duty because that is what soldiers do. When I got home to our apartment, it was already half empty. He had moved his things out while I was at work. His gaming computer, his clothes, his expensive watches, all gone. The apartment was silent, but it wasn't empty. I walked into the bedroom. In the back of the closet, pushed behind my old uniforms, was a long rectangular box wrapped in black velvet. I pulled it out. It was heavy. I sat on the edge of the bed and unzipped the case. Inside lay my Army officer's saber. The steel blade gleamed in the dim light. The etching on the blade read, "Captain Caitlin Lindsay. For honor and country." My father had given it to me when I was commissioned. He told me it was a symbol of my oath, a symbol that I was a protector. Corbin thought I was rigid. He thought I was too G.I. Jane. He thought I was weak because I had served him. He was about to learn the difference between a servant and a soldier. I gripped the hilt of the saber. It felt cold and familiar in my hand. He wants a war, I whispered to the empty room. He wants to fight over assets and image. I stood up and drew the sword fully from its scabbard. The sound was distinct. A sharp, ringing shringe of steel on steel. It was the sound of battle. If you want war, Corbin, I said, looking at my reflection in the blade, I will give you a war. But wars cost money. And right now, I had a divorce settlement offer that was an insult and a bank account that was empty. I needed firepower. I needed the best lawyer in D.C. And to get that, I would have to make one final sacrifice. A sacrifice that would hurt more than working the night shift. I looked down at the saber, then I looked at the shadow box on the wall, where my bronze star and my combat action badge were displayed. I'm sorry, Dad, I whispered. I put the sword back in its case. I took the medals off the wall. I wasn't going to pawn the ring. The ring was worthless to me now. I was going to sell my honor to buy my justice. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. The destination wasn't a pawn shop, it was K Street. And I was looking for a Viper. K Street in Washington, D.C. smells like power. It smells like freshly brewed espresso, expensive leather briefcases, and the distinct, metallic scent of ambition. I walked into the lobby of the glass and steel building that housed the law firm of Chin and Partners. I was wearing my best civilian clothes, a pair of slacks and a button-down shirt that I had ironed meticulously. Under my arm, I carried the long black velvet case. The receptionist looked at me over her designer glasses. I didn't have an appointment. I didn't look like their typical clientele, who usually arrived in limousines driven by chauffeurs. I'm here to see Marilyn Chin, I said. Ms. Chin is fully booked until next quarter, the receptionist sniffed, reaching for the phone to call security. Tell her Captain Lindsay is here, I said, my voice cutting through the lobby's hushed atmosphere. Tell her I have a weapon she might be interested in. 5 minutes later, I was sitting in a corner office with a view of the Capitol building. Marilyn Chin did not look like a viper. She looked like a fashion model who had decided to become a shark. She was petite, elegant, and radiated an intensity that made the air in the room feel thinner. She was known in D.C. circles as the Viper. Not because she was venomous, but because she struck fast, and she never missed. She sat behind a desk that was essentially a slab of black marble. She didn't offer me coffee, she just looked at me. You have 3 minutes, Captain, she said. My hourly rate is $900. You're currently wasting it. I don't have $900, I said bluntly. My husband, Corbin Reynolds, just served me divorce papers. He's the CEO of Restock Solutions. He's worth about $80 million. I have negative $12 in my checking account. Marilyn raised an eyebrow. So you're looking for charity? I don't do pro bono cases for sob stories. I'm not looking for charity, I said. I'm looking for a mercenary. I placed the velvet case on her desk. The sound was soft, heavy. I unzipped it and folded back the cloth. The sunlight from the window caught the steel blade of my officer's saber. It was flawless. The etching was sharp. The hilt was wrapped in gold wire. It was a beautiful, lethal piece of history. Marilyn looked at the sword. Then she looked at me. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed slightly. This is an army saber, she said. Regulation issue, ceremonial. It was a gift from my father, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was breaking. He gave it to me when I graduated West Point. It represents my honor, my oath. It's the only thing of value I own. I pushed the case toward her. I know it won't cover your retainer, but it's a down payment. It's collateral. If you take my case, I promise you, I will pay every cent I owe you when we win. If we lose, you keep the sword. Silence stretched in the room. I could hear the hum of the HVAC system. I could hear the traffic on K Street below. Marilyn stood up. She walked around the desk. She reached out and ran a finger along the flat of the blade. She didn't touch the edge. She knew how to handle a weapon. You would sell your honor to fight a divorce? She asked softly. He didn't just divorce me, I said. He erased me. He called me background noise. He thinks because I served him, I am beneath him. I am selling the symbol of my honor so I can reclaim the reality of it. Marilyn looked at me for a long moment. Then a slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a general who had just found the perfect soldier. She closed the case. She pushed it back toward me. Keep your sword, Captain, she said. You're going to need it. But the fee. We'll take it on contingency, she said, walking back to her chair. 30% of the settlement, plus damages. And looking at you, I think the damages are going to be substantial. She pressed a button on her intercom. Cancel my lunch, and get me the file on Restock Solutions. Every public filing, every press release, every tax return. For the next week, Marilyn's office became my command post. I didn't go back to the warehouse. I called in sick, then I quit. I had a new mission. We worked 18-hour days. We built a timeline of my relationship with Corbin that was more detailed than a military campaign plan. Here, I said, pointing to a bank statement from 2016. This transfer of $4,500, that was my combat pay. It bought the server stack that hosts their primary database. Good, Marilyn muttered, typing furiously. Direct financial contribution, traceable. And here, I pulled up an old email chain. These are the logistics protocols I wrote for him. He calls it proprietary AI. I call it standard operating procedure for convoy operations. Marilyn laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. He copy-pasted Army doctrine and sold it to Silicon Valley. The arrogance is staggering. Then I pulled out the trump card. The document from Paris. Marilyn read it. She read it twice. She took off her glasses and cleaned them, then read it a third time. This, she said, holding the paper like it was a holy relic, is not just a post-nup. This is a confession. He acknowledges your sweat equity. He acknowledges you as a partner. And it's notarized under international law. She looked up at me, her eyes gleaming. He thinks this is a simple divorce case in Virginia, she said. He thinks he's just cutting off a limb. He doesn't realize he signed a document that gives you the right to half the body. We prepared the filings. We prepared the exhibits. We prepared the questions for cross-examination. It was meticulous. It was brutal. It was war. The night before the court date, I was sitting in Marilyn's office staring at the stack of evidence boxes. I felt drained, empty. Are you scared? Marilyn asked. She was packing her briefcase, looking as fresh as if the day had just started. No, I said. I'm not scared. I'm just ready. Good, she said. Because tomorrow, we don't just win a lawsuit. Tomorrow, we take his head. She handed me a garment bag. What's this? I asked. Your armor, she said. I noticed your suit was practical. But in my courtroom, perception is reality. Wear this. It fits the narrative. I opened the bag. Inside was a navy blue blazer. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't flashy. But it was tailored perfectly. And on the lapel, Marilyn had pinned a small, discreet pin. The crossed sabers of the cavalry, my branch insignia. Don't let him forget who you are, she said. I touched the pin. I thought about the saber in the velvet box at home. I thought about my father. I thought about the cold nights in the guard shack. I won't, I said. Marilyn looked at her watch. Go home, Captain. Get some sleep. 0900 hours tomorrow. We attack. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like a descent into the launch tube. I walked out onto K Street. The air was cool. I was no longer the wife waiting for scraps. I was no longer the security guard hiding in the shadows. I was the plaintiff. And as the sun rose over the Potomac the next morning, turning the river into a ribbon of blood and gold, I stood in front of the mirror, put on the blazer, and pinned the sabers to my chest. Ready, I whispered. The transition from the quiet preparation of the lawyer's office to the sterile violence of the courtroom was jarring. But I was ready for the noise. I was ready for the lies. Because when I stood up in that courtroom, I wasn't just reaching for a piece of paper. I was reaching for the trigger. The courtroom was so silent you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. All eyes were fixed on the document in my hand. It wasn't a sword, but it cut just as deep. "You may approach, Mrs. Lindsay," Judge Callahan said, his curiosity piqued. I walked toward the bench. My steps were measured, rhythmic. Left, right, left, right. I handed the document to the bailiff, who then handed it to the judge. Marilyn Chin, sitting at the counsel table, looking like a sleek predator in her designer suit, stood up. "Your Honor," Marilyn said, her voice smooth and dangerous. "What you are holding is a notarized sweat equity and asset distribution agreement, signed by both parties in Paris, France, on October 14, 2019. It was drafted by Jean-Luc Beaumont, a specialist in international commercial law, and is fully enforceable under the Hague Convention and Virginia State Reciprocity Statutes." Corbin frowned. "Paris? We were on vacation. I didn't sign any agreement." Judge Callahan adjusted his glasses. He read the document. His eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. "Mr. Reynolds," the judge said, looking over the paper at my husband. "Is this your signature?" The bailiff walked the document over to Corbin. Corbin snatched it from his hand, annoyed. He glanced at it, ready to dismiss it. Then he saw it. The jagged, loopy scrawl at the bottom of page 3. Corbin J. Reynolds. His face went white. Not pale, white, like a sheet of printer paper. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. This is, he stammered. I remember signing customs forms, visa paperwork. She slipped this in. She tricked me." "Tricked you?" Marilyn interjected sharply. "Mr. Reynolds, are you admitting to the court that the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company signs legal documents without reading them?" "I was drunk," Corbin shouted, jumping to his feet. "We were celebrating. She took advantage of me." "Sit down, Mr. Reynolds," Judge Callahan barked, slamming his gavel. "You will maintain order in my courtroom." Corbin sank back into his chair, but his eyes were darting around the room, wild with panic. He looked at his lawyer, who was frantically reading the copy Marilyn had just handed him. The lawyer looked pale, too. He knew a kill shot when he saw one. Judge Callahan cleared his throat. "This document states, quite clearly, that in recognition of foundational technical contributions and financial investment, Caitlin Lindsay is entitled to 49% of all equity in Restock Solutions, fully vested immediately upon any filing for dissolution of marriage." A gasp rippled through the gallery. 49%, that was nearly half the company. That was tens of millions of dollars. Mia Reynolds let out a strangled cry. "That's impossible. She's a security guard. She's a nobody." "Order!" the judge roared. I turned to look at Corbin. He was trembling. He looked small. The Armani suit suddenly seemed too big for him. "You said I was background noise, Corbin," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. "You told this court I contributed nothing, that I was just existing while you built the future." I took a step closer to him. "Who taught you how to optimize the supply chain algorithm, Corbin? Who explained to you that just-in-time delivery fails without redundancy? Who showed you how the Army tracks fuel convoys in hostile environments and told you to apply that same logic to retail inventory?" Corbin stared at me, speechless. "I did," I answered for him. "I designed the logic architecture of your software on the back of a napkin in a Denny's at 3 a.m. because you couldn't figure out why your code was crashing. You wrote the code, yes, but I gave it a brain. I gave it a purpose." I pointed at him, my finger steady. "You aren't a visionary, Corbin. You're a frontman. You're an empty shell wrapped in an expensive suit, and without me, your entire system is just a chaotic mess of data." "She's lying," Corbin shrieked, his composure completely shattering. "She's a grunt. She carries a gun. She doesn't know Java. She doesn't know Python." "Maybe not," Marilyn Chin cut in, stepping forward with another stack of papers. "But she knows how to read a bank statement." Which brings us to Exhibit B. Marilyn slammed a thick binder onto the plaintiff's table. While Mrs. Lindsay was working night shifts to pay for your servers, Mr. Reynolds, it appears you were using company funds, funds that technically belong to the partnership, to finance a very lavish lifestyle for yourself and others. Marilyn opened the binder. Dinners at Le Diplomate, first-class tickets to Milan, Cartier jewelry purchased for a Ms. Rebecca Sterling. Rebecca, sitting in the gallery, gasped and covered her mouth. All eyes turned to her. She shrank down in her seat, looking like she wanted to dissolve into the floor. This is embezzlement, Mr. Reynolds, Marilyn said coldly. And since Mrs. Lindsay is a 49% shareholder, you have been stealing from her. The room was deadly silent. The air conditioning hummed, but now it sounded like a countdown. Judge Callahan looked at Corbin with undisguised disgust. He looked at the documents. He looked at me, standing tall, wearing my blazer with the crossed sabers pin. The court finds the Paris Agreement to be valid and enforceable, Judge Callahan ruled. His voice was the sound of a heavy door slamming shut. Mrs. Lindsay is hereby awarded 49% of the marital assets, including equity in Restock Solutions. Furthermore, due to the evidence of financial impropriety, I am ordering a forensic audit of the company's finances to be overseen by an independent trustee. Bang. The gavel came down. We're adjourned. It was over. Corbin slumped forward, putting his head in his hands. He was sobbing now. Ugly, gasping sobs. He wasn't crying for his marriage. He was crying for his money. He was crying because he had lost. Behind him, there was a commotion. Oh, my heart, Mia Reynolds cried out. She slumped sideways onto Rebecca, clutching her pearls. It was a theatrical faint, worthy of a daytime soap opera. Someone call a medic, Rebecca squeaked, trying to push the older woman off her Chanel dress. I didn't move to help. I was a trained first responder. I knew what a real medical emergency looked like. That wasn't it. That was the desperate exit strategy of a narcissist who had lost control of the narrative. I looked at Marilyn. She gave me a small, sharp nod, a warrior acknowledging another warrior. I turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom. As I passed the gallery, I saw the faces of the people who had judged me, the investors, the friends of the family. They weren't looking at me with pity anymore. They were looking at me with fear and respect. I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the hallway. The air out here was different. It wasn't cold, it wasn't sterile. It smelled like floor wax and freedom. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs completely for the first time in 7 years. The weight was gone. The background noise was gone. Corbin Reynolds was a billionaire on paper, but today he was bankrupt in every way that mattered. And me? I touched the pin on my lapel. I was Captain Caitlin Lindsay. And I had just completed my mission. But the mission wasn't just about destroying the enemy. It was about rebuilding the territory. And as I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright Virginia sunlight, I knew exactly what my next objective was. I wasn't going to Disneyland. I was going to build an empire of my own. An empire where loyalty was the currency and honor was the bottom line. And the first thing I was going to do was throw away the flowers that I knew would be arriving at my office tomorrow. Because traitors always try to buy their way back in when they realize they've lost the war. 6 months later. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office in Alexandria, Virginia. It wasn't the harsh, blinding light of the warehouse parking lot. It was warm, golden, and filled with promise. I sat behind a desk made of reclaimed oak, not marble. On the wall behind me, framed in simple black wood, was the original Man in the Arena quote that had once been taped to a dirty locker. Next to it hung my saber, finally returned to its rightful place of honor. I wasn't wearing a polyester security uniform. I wasn't wearing a dress from Ross. I was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that fit me like a second skin. On my lapel, gleaming in the sunlight, was a small pin. The crossed sabers of the cavalry. I took a sip of coffee from a mug that said, The Vanguard Initiative. That was the name of my new company. It wasn't a tech startup designed to sell user data. It was a business incubator specifically for veterans. We took men and women who knew how to lead under fire and gave them the capital and logistics support to build their own businesses. Through the glass wall of my office, I could see the main floor. It was buzzing with activity. But it wasn't the frantic, chaotic energy of Restock Solutions. It was disciplined. It was focused. I saw Sergeant Martinez, the man I had hidden from behind a dumpster, standing by a whiteboard, leading a strategy meeting. He was my chief of operations now. When I offered him the job, he had shaken my hand and said, "Captain, I'd follow you into hell. A boardroom is a walk in the park." My intercom buzzed. "Ma'am?" It was Sarah, my executive assistant, a former Navy corpsman who ran my schedule with military precision. "There's a delivery for you. It requires a signature." "Send it in," I said. The door opened, and a courier walked in carrying a vase of long-stemmed red roses. They were massive, ostentatious. The kind of arrangement that screams, "I spent $500 to say I'm sorry." Sarah placed them on the corner of my desk, looking unimpressed. "There's a card." I knew who they were from before I even saw the handwriting. Restock Solutions was in freefall. The forensic audit ordered by the court had uncovered not just the embezzlement regarding Rebecca, but a massive tax fraud scheme. The stock price had plummeted 60% in 3 months. The board of directors had fired Corbin as CEO last week. Rebecca had left him the day the subpoenas arrived. I picked up the card. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. "Caitlin," it read. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I realize now that you were the backbone of everything. Please, can we talk? I need you. Restock needs you. I still love you. I need you. Not I miss you. Not I'm sorry for hurting you. But I need you." He needed my 49% equity back. He needed my brain to fix the mess he had made. He needed a savior. I looked at the roses. They were beautiful in a sterile, commercial way. But they smelled like desperation. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hate. I felt nothing. It was the indifference you feel for a mosquito you've already swatted. "Sarah?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Do we have a trash can big enough for this?" Sarah smiled. It was a sharp, knowing smile. "I believe the recycling bin in the break room is empty." I stood up. I didn't take the card. I didn't take a single rose. I picked up the heavy crystal vase with both hands. I walked out of my office, past the rows of desks where veterans were building their futures. I walked straight to the large metal bin near the kitchen. Clunk. The sound of the vase hitting the bottom of the bin was heavy and final. The water splashed. The roses lay there, twisted and broken among the coffee grounds and shredded paper. "Recycle the glass if you can," I told Sarah. "The rest is just compost." I walked back to my office and closed the door. Silence returned, but it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. I walked to the window and looked out at the American flag waving in the courtyard. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was Marilyn Chin. "Hey, partner," the text read. "Just saw the news. Corbin is being indicted on 3 counts of fraud. Drinks on me tonight." I smiled and typed back, "Roger that. 1800 hours." I looked down at my hands. The calluses from the warehouse were starting to fade, but the strength was still there. These hands had held a rifle. They had held a mop. They had held a pen that signed away my freedom, and a pen that reclaimed it. Corbin had called me background noise. He was wrong. I was the signal. He was just the interference. I thought about the verse that had carried me through the darkest nights in the guard shack. Psalm 144, 1. "Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war, my fingers for battle." God had trained me well. He had put me through the fire so I could be forged into steel. The war was over. The enemy was defeated. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to fight to be seen. I sat down in my chair, opened my laptop, and started typing. Not a legal brief, not a letter to a traitor. I typed the header for the new grant proposal that would help 50 more veterans start their own businesses. The captain is reporting for duty, I thought, and she is just getting started. The sun climbed higher in the sky, flooding the room with light. It was a new day in Virginia, a new day for Caitlin Lindsay, and this time, no one was ever going to turn off her light again. Looking back, the most expensive lesson I learned wasn't about money, it was about self-worth. In the military, we are taught that mission comes first, but in life, you are the mission. We often confuse total sacrifice with love, believing that if we give away every piece of ourselves, we will be cherished. But I learned the hard way that you cannot pour from an empty cup. Never apologize for protecting your future. Having a contingency plan doesn't mean you don't trust. It means you respect yourself enough to ensure you're never left defenseless. Your dignity is the one asset you must never sell. Thank you for standing in the arena with me today. I know many of you are fighting battles that no one else sees, carrying burdens that feel too heavy to bear. I want this channel to be a place where you find your strength again. If my story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so we can keep fighting these battles together. And if you made it to the very end, prove it to me. Go to the comments and type the word unbreakable. Let the world know that no matter how hard life hits, you are still standing.